right, today we are talking about the Indian Child Welfare Act, also known as ICWA. So the Indian Child Welfare Act was enacted in 1978 in response to a crisis affecting American Indian and Alaska Native children, families, and tribes. Studies revealed that large numbers of Native American children were being separated from their parents, extended families, and communities by state child welfare and private adoption agencies. In fact, research found that 25 to 35% of all Native children were being removed. Of these, 85% were being placed outside of their families and communities, even when fit and willing relatives were available. Congressional testimony documented that devastating impact this was having on Native children and tribes. ICWA set federal requirements that apply to state child custody proceedings involving an Indian child who is a member or eligible for membership in a federally recognized tribe. Among its added protections for Native children, ICWA requires caseworkers to make several considerations when handling an ICWA case, including providing active efforts to the family, identifying a placement that fits under ICWA preference provisions, notifying the child's tribe and the child's parents of the child custody proceedings, and working actively to involve the child's tribe and the child's parents in the proceedings. ICWA has been in effect for 44 years, and unfortunately the Supreme Court announced that this fall they will be reviewing the Indian Child Welfare Act. But something to take into consideration with this court review is who is behind the court challenge. So the case is Brackeen versus Haaland, and it is a lawsuit that is asserting that the law is unconstitutional because it is in fact racist to not allow white parents to adopt Indigenous children. That being said, the lawyers representing the couple bringing this lawsuit are actually Gibson Dunn lawyers, and they are doing this pro bono. And for those who do not know who Gibson Dunn is, they are a law firm that has fought tribal nations in both casino cases and also further the interests for big oil company clients. They are the ones that represented the Energy Transfer pipeline company behind the Dakota Access Pipeline, the very pipeline that Indigenous people have protested against at Standing Rock. And it's estimated that Indigenous resistance against DAPL cost the pipeline upwards of $7.5 billion. Indigenous resistance worried the oil industry, and only 7 months after the Indigenous camps at North Dakota were shut down, Gibson Dunn filed the Brackeen's case in federal court pro bono. The Native American Rights Fund states that opponents to ICWA aim to simultaneously exploit Native children and undermine tribal rights. Stephen Dawsinger, a lawyer that won $9.5 billion judgment against Chevron in Ecuador, stated on Instagram, "The same Chevron lawyers who jailed me and demonized Amazon Indigenous peoples in Ecuador are now using an adoption case to help big oil undermine tribal sovereignty in the U.S." I will link the resources that I just read from in the description of this video, as well as additional resources to take on the fossil fuel industry. The second half of this video is going to cover some of those resources. Those of you who have been hanging out with me on TikTok for a while have heard of my famous petitions and links page. I have not explained it in a minute, so if you're new to this, welcome. Let's go over it. So at the very top is the register to vote and resources section, and the reason why that is first is because one of the largest tools at the disposal of oil executives is actually our legislature, and those who write our and they use lobbyists to pay for either legislation to be written or to have it passed, both at state and federal level. So with that in mind, we need to participate in politics and use the resources that are available to inform our votes, and pay attention to who our candidates are, track what their voting habits are when it comes to our policy, and vote accordingly. So I'm never going to tell you how to vote unless it's Democratic Indigenous representation, because I say always Indigenous representation is the way to go, but maybe I'm a little biased in that regard. Anyways, so I'm gonna have all of the voting resources right here, and you can go to my link page to check those out. So first step is voting, participating in the elections. Next step is going to be checking out my additional resources when it comes to ICWA and the history of Indian residential schools in the United States, because those two topics are very much related, and in order to understand one, you need to understand the other. So I will be doing a more extended video on the resources I have in regards to residential schools in the past as well as present day. So that'll be next time, but here I will have my resources for anyone who would like to take a look ahead of time, as well as there's a video that goes over an open residential school in the United States that I have talked about before. So there's that. And then additional resources that I do have are going to be land back resources. You can check out Land Back Explained. You also have various climate action groups that people can join. They have local chapters as well as global chapters, and social medias in order to amplify their messages. Also, I have alternative green energy job resources. So if anyone who comes across my video happens to work within the fossil fuel industry, there are resources available in order to transition you into alternative energy jobs with similar skill set requirements. Also have various other ways to go about amplifying Indigenous voices and tackling Indigenous causes, and various court rulings explained and how they are a threat to tribal sovereignty. So that's the petitions and links page, and there is always something more to do, and I'm adding to it all the time. So I hope this explained some questions you may have had. If you have any additional questions, please leave them in the comments. I am checking them. And again, next week I will be covering the history of residential schools as well as the open ones that we are aware of today. All right, bye.